So just to start at the beginning, I guess, I would say that I'm children of Nigerian immigrants. I'm 20, I'm an English student, I go to Selwyn, and I think before I came to Cambridge, because I live in an inner city area that's quite diverse. I live in a place called Edmonton in North London, and I went to a school that was very, very diverse in terms of ethnicity. I'd never really been asked to think critically about race because I had this idea of when I was in school, I didn't think that anything existed outside of my school because I was so invested in like the school community. I was like head girl, I had lots of responsibilities, and so I never really thought about race outside of a kind of vague understanding of obviously history, and an understanding that I might be, less desirable, less easier to approach, or it might be harder for me to get a job because of what I looked like. I think I've always had ideas and opinions, and I've always been able to articulate them in certain ways. And I think the culmination of what I've come to be, or who I am, or what my beliefs are now, comes from finding out about feminism when I was in year 10 in sociology, and coming to Cambridge. So I remember when I got my offer. Not many people from my school came to Cambridge, so there was a lot riding on it. There was a lot of pressure. There was this pressure of representation, but also I think a pressure I put on myself because Cambridge is always framed as a mark of distinction, which is strange to me, and it was strange then and it's strange now. And also I think, particularly being an English student, people always assumed that I was coming to do law or medicine because the framing and understanding of what the subjects that Black people can take and are the subjects that they're interested in is very kind of small. We're always put into a kind of niche corner. And so where I live, strangely enough, I started to see links with Cambridge because where I live is where Keats was born and where he lives, and now it's virtually unrecognisable. Like Keats wouldn't know what was happening in the place that he was born now. He'd be very confused. So I thought those links were really interesting as well. I think when I got to Cambridge, despite all of these things that I was resisting, the scope of what I imagined for myself did open up, and the opportunities that were presented to me were a lot more than where I came from. And some of my first memories of this place are about like posturing and also code switching, and recognizing very quickly that there were people who were very different to me, and that I was in some ways very much outside of what was happening. There was a kind of shared cultural capital that was assumed, I think, is assumed in every subject that I sometimes felt locked out of because, I didn't understand references, or I didn't get this, or hadn't read this, or and so that kind of solidified the idea of being an outsider and not really understanding. But it also, I think what happened when I came here was that my identity automatically became more political, and so where I hadn't really felt the need to kind of not cling to, but really investigate what it means to be Black in a space, or find people who look like me and discuss, the effects of racism or the effects of microaggressions or those kinds of small things. The second I got here, I was like, this is something that's very necessary. And I think early on I realised what I cared about. I realised that was the thing that was important to me. And so that was the thing that I pursued more than, academic study, the conversations that I'd had with people, the experiences that I put on, the events that we held, stuff like that. It was in those spaces that I recognised that there is a really important legacy that students of colour need to leave behind, or that our presence is actually really important, and that we have things to say that haven't actually been said before, and we can say them in different forms, whether that means it through like kind of small acts of resistance, I think. So that can be from, refusing to write your dissertation on Auden and choosing to do it on contemporary poets in Black contemporary poets in inner city London, or writing an essay on a woman, or bringing in theorists and critiques that aren't necessarily used because they're not deemed, acceptable by a specific academic framework. I think another thing that happened when I got here was that I was looking quite a lot for outlets for this kind of frustration that I had, because I came here as someone who cared quite deeply about these issues, and I saw that people were struggling and nobody ever said anything. So I was always the person who was like arguing with people, and it was always very exhausting because you're put in the position of being of an educative position. You have to teach people things that they didn't know before, and a lot of people would say to me, wow, I never thought about it in this way, or you're the first kind of black person that I've ever met, or it's just small things which when you frame your personhood as something that you have to constantly defend, it can become quite tiring. And so I remember a quite distinctive moment where I realised that I could just be. I didn't have to be necessarily anybody's teacher. I could, go out with my friends. I could have picnics. I could just enjoy myself. And that's when I started, I think, to cultivate spaces that platform the voices of BME students. So as the facilitator of FLY, we hold weekly kind of meetings where women of colour can come together and kind of discuss some of the issues that they might have, some of the feelings of isolation, some of the feelings of alienation, some of the feelings of not being desirable, not feeling smart enough, posturing, all of the things that everybody kind of knows happened but doesn't really speak about. And one of the great joys of being here actually has been being in those meetings weekly and seeing the events that we hold and seeing people rail, seeing people cry, seeing people laugh, seeing people really be able to finally relax into themselves, because being here, in an 8-week period is quite stressful. And then if you put on top of that all of the microaggressions, all of the little comments, all of the kind of ideas you might have about how other people perceive you, it can be quite stressful. And so to have those spaces where people could say things out loud. I remember one particularly, last time we held a kind of it was called Fly Host Men of Colour, which was basically men and women of colour around Cambridge. We all came and gathered in the SU and had this massive discussion about what it means to be here, and is it our obligation to leave things behind? Should we? Can we? What do we do? How do we feel if we're tired? All of that kind of stuff. And it was such a joyous and life-affirming experience, because now I'm realising, because of the year that's coming up below me, that my time is coming to an end, and so all of the work that I've done has to be carried on. There needs to be structures in place so that other people can feel that they're not alone. I think the battling of loneliness is something that I've tried really hard in everything I've done to kind of combat, because the idea that there's someone sitting in their college not able to talk about all of these feelings really upsets me, because it's that kind of isolation that leads to more harmful things, I think. So just on that, just more ideas about so when I got here, I kind of started writing about a lot of these frustrations, and one of the things that was so again life affirming was people emailing me or messaging me or saying, oh God, you said this thing, so you feel it too. This is a thing that is happening and we're allowed to say it, and what is it? How do we make it better? How do you protect yourself against it? How have you coped with it? And a lot of, I think, being here has been about community. For me, has been about community, and it's been about coping, and it's been about making sure there are mechanisms in place so that people feel like they have the help that they need, even if they don't feel like they need it. Because I've also spoken to a lot of students who don't feel the same anxieties and are people of colour, and that's absolutely fine, because there are a variety of ways to be a non-white person. We're not all the same. But what I did want to do was make sure that there were places where people could speak. So just lately in general, now that I guess my time's coming to an end and I'm feeling a bit more reflective, I've been thinking about legacy and what it is exactly that we are leaving behind. And in last year I did something called the Fly Girls Guide to Cambridge, which was just a compilation of little tips and advice and funny things that people had said about Cambridge and ways that they had navigated it. And that was something that we put online. We have the Fly blog, which is a place where people can post articles and stuff. And those things have, I think, been really formative and really helpful. And so alongside that, it's really also really nice to know that I now know, BME people who are going to be, artists and directors and are going to do loads of really important things. And again, I think that's the thing that's been most critical to me. And outside of, the alienation that I might sometimes feel from an institution that doesn't recognise the work of unpaid student activists or people who care about things, because a lot of the things that students do are unpaid. When I was campaigning to get a BME officer in my college, that took up a lot of my time, and that was unpaid. When we did the petition against David Starkey, that took up a lot of our time, and that was unpaid. All of the things, all of the kind of BME access events that happen in specific colleges are put together by students who sacrifice their time and are never kind of repaid in any kind of way. And so those are the things that I think are important, and those are the things that I'd like to emphasize. And I say this because the more that I am critical, the more that we change it, the more that we mold it into a shape that we want it to be, the more that we're clawing back spaces of ownership. And I think ownership and belonging is really important, and that's the reason why I do it, I think.